Hi, my name is Christina Becerra, and I will be doing cognitive processing therapy for PTSD. And I will be doing steps 1, 2, 3, and 5 in cognitive processing therapy. And this is my patient,
Juan Gomez.
and he is a combat veteran who suffers from PTSD. So let's begin. So first, session 1 is the introduction and education phase. Overall, there are several goals for the first session. Number 1 is to build rapport with the patient. Second, to educate the patient regarding symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. And third, to provide a rationale for treatment based on cognitive conceptualization of PTSD. And fourth, to lay out the course of treatment and elicit treatment compliance. So we will begin. Hi Juan, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Great. Well, in going over the results of your testing, we found that you're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. The symptoms of PTSD fall into 3 clusters. Are you aware of these?
Only from what I've heard in the media, but not really.
Okay, well, let me just explain it to you. The first cluster is the re-experiencing of the event in some way. This includes nightmares about the event or other scary dreams, flashbacks when you act or feel as if the incident is reoccurring, intrusive thoughts, which are memories that suddenly just pop into your mind. You might have the intrusive thoughts when there's something in the environment to remind you of the event, including anniversaries of the event, or even when there is nothing to remind you of it. Common times to have these memories are when you're falling asleep, when you relax, when you're bored. These symptoms are all normal and following a traumatic event. And so you're not going crazy, and just want to let you know that. And can you give me any examples of these experiences in your own life currently? Like any sleep, any nightmares?
My experience in combat in Vietnam, I was only 19 years old, very young, and every time there's something pop like a firecracker or something, I just jump instinctively, and those things bring memories. Uh, when I hear babies scream and throwing tantrums, it just triggers things in my mind about what happened and different things that went on during my 1 year tour in Vietnam.
Okay. So it sounds like maybe you have flashbacks.
Yes,
Mhm.
specifically around, you mentioned anniversary.
Mhm.
Uh, I had spent my birthday in Vietnam. Of course, I was there 1 year, so around the time of my birthday, I had a very traumatic experience. So that is a permanent trigger, always happens on my birthday.
Okay. Well, a second set of symptoms concern arousal. As might be expected when reminded of the event, you are likely to experience very strong emotions. Along with these feelings are physical reactions. Indicators of arousal symptoms include problems falling asleep or staying asleep, irritability, outbursts of anger, difficulty concentrating, startle reactions like jumping or noises if someone walks up behind you, always feeling on guard or looking over your shoulder when there's no reason to. Um, which of these do you experience?
Uh, the part about the arousal, the part about feeling guilty, uh, because it was an era where it was an unpopular war and people didn't seem to understand it, and I myself did not understand it. So we did our job, we came back, we weren't treated as heroes. It was a time of turmoil, protests, riots, protesting the war, and so you would come home and you would feel guilty. You would hear people screaming at you, baby killers, things like that. And so every time I feel this guilt. I was just doing my job, but people didn't see it that way. So arousal, feelings of guilt, feelings of anger, uh, people would bring up the subject, and just the mere thought of them not understanding that through no fault of ours, you're drafted, you have to do a job, almost forced to do it. So it's the quick short temper that comes out of that, and try to bring everything together with your emotions.
Okay. Well, and so now that I've explained I would continue explaining the other clusters of PTSD, but since we don't have time for that, I'm going to fast forward to the cognitive component of cognitive processing therapy. Okay, Juan. Well, as you were growing up, I want to explain to you the reasoning behind cognitive processing therapy and the cognitive component and why it is so important in this therapy. Um, as you were growing up, you learned about the world and organized it into categories. We call these schemas, or beliefs, in other words. For example, when you were small, you learned that a thing with a back, seat, and four legs is a chair. In the beginning, you just called all of them chair. You may have even called a couch a chair or a stool a chair because they had a back seat and four legs. But later, as you got older, through experience, you learned more complex categories. So you may have learned dining room chair, rocking chair, recliner, folding chair. We develop many categories of ideas and beliefs about others, the world, and ourselves, as well as for objects. One common belief that people have while growing up is that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. Have you heard that before?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is called the just world belief. You may have learned this through your religion, your parents, your teachers, aunts, uncles, and you may have picked it up as a way to make the world seem safer and more predictable. It makes more sense when you are young. For example, parents wouldn't want to say, if you do something you're not supposed to do, you may or may not get in trouble. However, as we grow up, we realize that the world is more complex than that, just like how we learn that there are all different types of chairs. If you have ever had things go bad and you said, why me? Then you have a just world belief. So, why this is so important is because whenever an unexpected event occurs, such as a traumatic event, that doesn't match with your beliefs, there are different ways that you can try to make it fit. One way that you may have tried to make the event and your beliefs fit is by changing your memories or interpretation of the event to fit with your pre-existing beliefs. This is called assimilation. Examples of changing your interpretation memories of the event are to blame yourself for not preventing the event or protecting loved ones, to have trouble accepting that the event happened, to forget that it happened, or to forget that the most horrifying parts. Changing the event may seem easier than changing your entire set of beliefs about the world and how people behave, or your beliefs about your safety. So basically, let's say that before this trauma happened, you had a prior schema or prior belief of the world. And then this traumatic event happens, so now you have this new information that you're dealing with. Well, now your old information and your new information is trying to fit together in your mind, but it doesn't make sense because they both are conflicting. Because one says, I can trust some people, but this other belief is saying I can't trust anyone because the traumatic event changed the way you think. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yes.
Okay, so there's also accommodation and over accommodation, which are also other processes, which I do not have time to explain. And in this step is when I would ask the client to give a brief review of the most traumatic event. And this wouldn't be necessarily when they write down their narrative, just it is an opportunity for me to identify their stuck points and to see what their thought process is like. However, there is not time for that, so I will end the session by giving the patient a homework assignment. Okay, Juan, For the next session, I want you to start working on how you think about and explain the traumatic event. I also want you to pay attention to how the traumatic event impacted your views of yourself, other people, and the world. I want you to write at least one page, and preferably handwritten, because research says that you're able to process more when you handwrite something rather than type
Okay.
it. Why I want you to write at least one page on, first, why the event happened to you, and second, how has it changed or strengthened your views about yourself, other people, and the world in general.
Okay.
I want you to try to stray away from a dry, factual version of your story and kind of give more sensory details of what happened and how this changed how you feel and think about the world and others and yourself. Um, in order for this assignment to be most helpful for you, I strongly suggest that you start this assignment soon so that you have enough time to write thoughtfully. So pick a time and a place where you can concentrate and think, and bring that to your next session.
Okay.
Okay?
I will. Thank
Sounds
you.
good? Okay. Okay, so next we are moving on to session 2 of CPT. And this is whenever the client, we make meaning of the event. The goal of this second session is to review the cognitive behavioral formulation of PTSD and depression, to begin to determine the patient's stuck points and formulate why the patient has not recovered naturally from the event, which is also known as the impact statement, to begin helping the patient identify and see the connection among events, thoughts, and emotions. And the primary vehicle for understanding the patient's understanding of their own trauma and its effects is through the impact statement. So review the effects of the trauma on one's life can also be used to enhance motivation for change. Hi, Juan. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
How did the assignment go for you?
Very well. Very well.
It did?
Yes.
Would you be willing to read it to me?
On the when I was in high school during the Vietnam War, I had a different view of the world. You always thought that you were told that you had to do your patriotic duty when duty called. In my case, I was drafted into the army. So I thought I was just doing a patriotic thing, not knowing and understanding what this war was all about. Well, fast forward into the time that I went from doing the right thing to actually going in to the war in Vietnam. And all of the atrocities and all of the things that happened and so unpopular a war. And then you come back and you think, you start to second guess yourself, did I do the right thing? So here I am trying to do the right thing, and when I'm there, I have mixed emotions about maybe that wasn't the right thing. And a lot of the guys, they just did not, they dodged the draft. They went to Canada, they did other things. And I'm thinking maybe I should have been one of them. Maybe it would have changed my whole life experience. So the conflict that I have now is I was trying to do the right thing, but perhaps it was the wrong thing. So how do I come to terms with that?
Okay.
I don't know if that is the part of the assignment requirement that you requested, but those are.
Well, yeah, it's important because you're feeling feelings of guilt, um, first of all, and conflicted, and if what you were doing is like moral conflict is what we call it, and it was it the right thing to do for you to go and participate in a war, even though you didn't necessarily want to, but you were drafted, and so no, that can be traumatic whenever you're only 18 and you're at a young age drafted into a war. Well, I challenge you for your next assignment to recall an event that you remember when you were at war that might have been that was traumatic for you. If there was a time whenever you felt unsafe and when you might have witnessed deaths and those experiences, and that this is a safe place to experience that. So, but this is a good start to work with. And so, thank you for spending time writing your narrative and doing your homework. I want to talk about your impact statement that you wrote. What kinds of things did you think about when you were what kinds of things did you write about when thinking about what it means to you that getting drafted happened to you? Like, what feelings did you have as you wrote it?
Uh, Basically, unfair. Uh, Back then, if you didn't have resources, you didn't have money and all that, it was almost a sure thing that you were going to go get drafted. So basically, uh, the way things were unfair to us. They were at low income, low uh, resources. So unfairness. Uh, the other thing, the other thing is, had I done things different, had I done things different, uh, second guessing all the time, second guessing, armchair quarterbacking. What would I have done different? How would my life have been different? And the other thing is the guilt portion that comes. I was one of the fortunate that came back, but some of them didn't come back, including some of the people in my company. So why was I the lucky one and they were not? Not just the feeling of guilt of what took place there, but knowing that some came back in body bags and some of us came back at least physically there, maybe not mentally there. So it all goes back to the why me and why not them.
So I heard guilt, and you felt like it was unfair.
Unfair.
So as you were writing this out, your experience, your traumatic event, were you feeling guilty as you wrote it? What were your feelings as you were writing it?
Well, every sentence that I wrote was, the first sentence was hard, the next one was harder and harder and harder. And it took a long time to just even write one paragraph. So I would have to go back and think about it and emotionally drained. It was very emotionally draining to just even, it's hard enough talking about it, but writing about it is probably just as emotionally draining on myself. And so it just kind of brings everything together. It's a culmination of all the events that took place. And so it was just a one-page write-up was an emotional drain.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned emotional drain. Which emotion drained you the most?
Well, the events that happened, in particular, one day that I remember the most, out on patrol in Vietnam, where we had reports of enemy operations, and we had a patrol of 8 of us, and we went down to a village. All of us were not knowing what to expect. After a while, you think you're synthesized, but coming back, only 6 of us made it, including one of my best friends that got killed. That part is the toughest.
But back to the emotion. Did you feel sad when you wrote it? Did you feel mad? Did you feel angry? What's two emotions?
I felt angry. I felt feelings of betrayal. I felt feelings of just uneasiness, all of those things.
So in this session, you would continue. If the patient did not recognize his feelings of the connections to beliefs, you help the patient tie his thoughts to feelings and behavior. You do this by mentioning, how do these thoughts influence your mood? How do they affect your behavior? I, as a therapist, should make sure that the patient sees a connection between his thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Sometimes a simple why question can help the client's patient's thinking. But now we are going to move on to the next step. Of course, this is kind of speed tracking, but we're going to skip over to session 5, which is the identification of stuck points. The session 5 goals are to have the patient read and discuss the newest version of the trauma account, discuss the new additions or deletions, to check the progress of effective expression and self-blame, guilt, and other forms of assimilation, continue cognitive therapy on stuck points regarding to the event, introduce the challenging questions so that the patient will begin to use Socratic questions himself, and assign challenging questions sheets and an account for another traumatic event if needed. Now we're just going to skip on to the later goal, which is the challenging questions worksheet, which looks like this. And it is brought from the theory of Beck and his questions of challenging maladaptive thoughts. Okay, Juan, we are running short of time, but we have a few more minutes. So, what is a belief that you have now from the after the traumatic event? What belief do you have?
Well, basically that life goes on, and it's kind of like you have to bury the past, the hatchet. If 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 you're lucky enough to be one of the ones that made it, you almost have to start thinking positive. And basically, as I've always said, the ball doesn't bounce your way every time. In my case, it didn't bounce my way, but I have to accept that it won't bounce your way every time. So life is not fair sometimes, but you just have to move on.
Okay. And since we're running short on time, I'm going to combine session 7 with session 5. And session 7 is when you explain the 5 major areas that are impacted or affected after a traumatic event, which are areas of trust, safety, esteem, intimacy, and power. So I'm going to incorporate session 7 into the session 5 questions worksheet right now. Okay, well, Juan, I'm not sure if I have explained this before, but there are 5 major areas that are impacted when something traumatic happens to you. The 5 main areas of themes are power, intimacy, trust, esteem, and safety. Now, along these 5 themes, which do you think has changed your belief in one of these areas? In maybe trust or maybe safety?
Trust.
How so?
It's like you don't trust the institutions, you question the status quo, all of those things. I know that later on in life, I've got a family, and my thought was my kids are not going to go to war. I don't trust. I trust them, but I do not trust institutions like the government to send them in harm's way, and that's why I didn't want them to go to join the military for that reason. And I think in retrospect I was right, because had they joined the military, they might have been in our more recent wars. So mainly the issue of trust, not trusting, questioning the status quo, that kind of thing. Being your own person, I guess, and understanding what is the right thing to do, even at all costs.
So, not trusting institutions. So,
Being very careful not to just be
Okay.
trustworthy, yes.
what evidence do you have for this?
Well, the fact that people make mistakes, that in retrospect, after now that the Vietnam War is over, the history books and everything you hear about basically saying that it was a mistake. Now, here we are killing each other, and we're killing them, they're killing us. 58,000 died. And now we're trading with Vietnam as if nothing happened.
Okay. What evidence do you have against this idea?
I guess the idea is that you have to trust at some point certain things. You cannot be 100% untrusting. So, but at least leave a little bit of wiggle room there to trust. Again.
Okay. Well, now the remaining of session 5 would be to cover the rest of the questions, which would be: is your belief a habit or based on facts? Are your interpretations of the situation too far removed from reality to be accurate? Are you thinking in all or none terms? Are you using words or phrases that are extreme or exaggerated? Is the source of information reliable? Basically, these are all ways to challenge maladaptive thinking that the client has after the traumatic event. And like I mentioned earlier, I combined session 7 with the 5 major areas of beliefs and explaining that to the client very briefly with the session 5. So in total, CPT is made up of 12 weekly sessions. We only cover sessions 1, 2, 3, and 5, and also 7. And so these are 12 sessions that are weekly and can go from over to a year and maybe longer, just depending on what the client needs. And that is a brief overview of cognitive processing therapy.